Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Talk with the Titans, live from London, UK, all the way to the US of A and worldwide. I'm your host, Kalam, and this is Talk with the Titans. On tonight's show, we've got my brother Scott Lane in the building. Peace to you, King. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good, brother. What's going on with you?
And it's all good, man. I've been having a busy week, and
Yeah.
it's about to get even busier, man. I've got some great Titans on. I've got you on right now, and it's just going to be a phenomenal show. We're going to be answering that in the conscious community and a lot in the black community as well. You know, there's always this stigma. I'm even hearing it as Speaker's Corner of all places in the British community amongst, Muslims and atheists and all sorts. And they scream out this age old axiom of Christianity is the white man's religion. Christianity is the white
Right.
man's religion. I'm now
Yeah.
even going through the comment section here with me right now. They say, you know what? From Africa, Christianity is a white man's religion. Other people are saying, you know what? I heard Jesus was a black, though with woolly hair and whatever. So I want to know. I want to know from you, my brother.
Okay.
Can you answer me this question? Actually, before you even go there and answer the question, um, I want you to give it like a quick synopsis or biography of who you are exactly.
Cool, man. Well, first of all, appreciate you having me on here, man. I go by the name Scott Lane online, but my real name's Adam Coleman. That confuses a lot of people. I did hip hop for a good amount of time, so Scott Lane was kind of like the alias. So switching over to my real name, doing a lot of blogs and stuff, throws a lot of people off. But that's me right there. I'm the husband of one and a father of three. Three little toddlers, and as a matter of fact, I just want to say thank you, by the way, man. Doing this show kind of gives me an excuse to, take a break from changing diapers and, wiping snotty noses and all that kind of stuff. So, definitely good looking out on that, bro. But yeah, man, I got into, I guess I'm just of the belief that if a worldview is worth anything, then it ought to be able to stand up to questions. And I'm a very inquisitive person. So a couple years ago, I am a Christian. I started digging into what I believe to be, some solid defenses of the faith, man. And so just been studying up on it. And that kind of led me to get into this question of, whether or not Christianity is the white man's religion. I was raised in a Christian household, but what's interesting is I guess we were Christians, but at the same time, like my parents were really big on knowing your heritage, knowing your history. And so I kind of had that dual influence. And so, kind of coming up, I had both sides of it. And so it just kind of trickled down into, my interests as an adult. So I got a website now, man, a podcast, the True ID podcast. You know how to blackerize it, so it's spelled a little different. It's TRUID podcast.com is where people can check that out. And I'm just up here trying to share with the people, man, just give my perspective. And hopefully the people in the chat will I got a bet going. How many times I'm gonna be called a coon, but in the chat room. So hopefully you guys can help me win that bet between me and my wife. So we'll see how that goes. You know what I'm saying?
I'll be the indicator. I'll tally it up. I'll tally it up. Let's see. Let's see if we can change people's minds out there in the
Sure,
audience,
sure.
or are we simply going to be reinforcing the same same thoughts amongst the community members. And that being said, family members, again, you know what, I'm going to invite you guys in on the later half of the show. As panel members, if you would like to be a panel member on this particular show, okay, all you have to do is Facebook me. My Facebook information is literally down below in the description box. You can find my information there. Is Kalam, SPEL. You'll find everything there. You can just literally click that, go onto it, inbox me. I want to be on the panel, and I'll make sure I'll put you on the panel. In that being said as well, please hit the share button. Hit the share button. We're about to go in. We're definitely about to go in with some powerful information, a powerful presentation you got for us, right?
Yes, sir. I hope
All
so.
right. So it's going to be crazy. It's going to be crazy, jam-packed with a lot of information, a lot of quotes, a lot of researchable information. It's going to be a powerful show. Trust me, if you're a Christian, if you are a Hebrew Israelite, or if you're just someone who wants to know more about this black thing, so to speak, please click on. If you even want to debate my brother on these topics, click on. I'm not encouraging no debate, but I'm saying if you really want to get it in, click on right now, okay? we're going to get started. This show is going to be absolute fire. Brother, before you actually start as well, just give them an overview of all the topics you will be covering in your presentation.
Got you. So, so basically what I'll be doing is covering 5 basic points. Now, typically when people look to answer the question of whether or not Christianity is the white man's religion, typically they'll start with Christianity in Africa and kind of give a history there. So I will be going over some of that. But to be honest with you, I consider that to be the easy question, because obviously Christianity was in Africa, way before the transatlantic slave trade. So in addition to that, I will also be tackling what I call the hard question, which is, addressing Christianity within the context of the Western world during and since the transatlantic slave trade, Christianity amongst the slaves and things like that. So I consider that to be the tougher hill to climb, but we're going to take a stab at it. And I'm very interested in philosophy as well, man. So we're going to tackle just a few basic philosophical points when it comes to the objection that Christianity is the white man's religion, kind of break it down from a philosophical standpoint and just show how I just don't think it stands up to solid logic. And yeah, so I think it'll be a fun show.
Yeah, I got that feeling. It's gonna be really interesting, to say the least.
Right. Get your popcorn ready.
Trust me. Let me give my quick shout outs to everybody who's actually inside the comment section. Peace to my brother Sarah, Mohammed Mustafa, Kush TV, Siobhan. Who we got here? Big Valley, my brother. Peace out to content over everything. Where's Adonic, man? Where's my Adonic vision as well? Where are you at, King? Where you at? Again, Lamb of God. I know you're gonna be in here. Where's my other Christian brothers as well? Please tune in. Get your Christian brethren involved, sistering involved. Oh yeah, Adonic is in the building. I love that. Okay. So what was I saying? Remember, I told you, okay? I already told you. Okay, I want to be covering all of the different faiths. I want to give them the opportunity to come onto the show unhampered to present the information. I'm going to promote them. And guess what? We've got my Christian brothers stepping up to the plate. And you know what? His information is about to go in. So this is like the litmus test. This is literally showing you what I was talking about. My brother is stepping up right now. He's giving a presentation for you. So if any of you other guys, atheists, Muslims, Jews, Comedics, whatever you are, if you want to get on the show to present your information to the vast majority of audience members that we have amassed so far, please holler at your brother. Holler at me. Just holler at me. Drop me an email. I'll Facebook me and we'll definitely get in touch. Okay. All right. Beautiful. Share again, man. Share and hit the like button, man. I'm seeing you liking it so far. So it's going to be wonderful. All right, family. Let's get it in. My brother. Go.
All right, let's go. First of all, man, I just before I even get started, man, I want to give respects to my mother, the strongest woman I know, Mom Coleman. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be who I am, where I am, and doing what I love to do. Also, definitely got to give respects to my wife. She's the queen and backbone of the Coleman household. Matter of fact, if it wasn't for her holding it down with the kids right now, I wouldn't be here enjoying this evening with y'all. We'll talk with a Titan. So definitely want to give big ups to her, and definitely also want to pay big respect to the elders of the community. I'm thankful for this opportunity to come and share with the people. And so with that said, let's go ahead and dive in. Let's get the preliminaries out of the way here. Now, first of all, just to kind of put you guys' mind at ease, let me just say this right quick. I prepared this presentation within about a week or so. When you issued that challenge, man, I was on it, brother. So I got some fresh information, but because of that, I will be relying on my notes pretty heavily. So, but I definitely want to get all this information to y'all. I'm not going to be preaching a sermon to y'all today, so hopefully that'll kind of put your mind at ease a little bit. For whatever reason, the conscious community is under the mistaken impression that all us Christians do is quote the Bible, and and that's about it. But as for today, the vast majority of what we're going to be talking about is just straight history and philosophy. Number two, I'm not here to make excuses for the church or defend the professing Christians that took part in chattel slavery. I'm here to defend Christianity itself, or more specifically, the message and mission of Jesus Christ. I want to make that clear first and foremost. Also, number three, I'm not here to emotionally sway the crowd. I think you said it best, Kalam. I was on that live chat with you a couple of episodes back, and asked you what you thought were the main beefs that people had in the conscious community against Christianity. And I think you rightly said it's in large part the bad taste left in our mouths from slavery, oppression, and so on. And that pain runs deep, and I respect that. That being said, for this evening, I really want to interact with my thinkers out there. All right. Those who are interested in truth, logic, and evidence, right? Today is all about facts. We may work our way towards the feelings part, at a later point, but it's all about facts today. And number 4, the focus of this discussion is not whether or not Christianity is true. Now, I think that would be an interesting discussion to have, the evidence for Christianity and, how we can rationally affirm it. And that may come into play a little bit later on. But this presentation, that isn't the issue at hand here. Now, with that said, what I am here to do is I want to address the question, is Christianity the white man's religion? Spoiler alert, no. No, it's not. But anyway, now different people mean slightly different things when it comes to, the phrase white man's religion. It's sort of a blanket term with a range of meaning. So for the sake of clarity and all of us being on the same page as to what I'm trying to, drive home for the audience, I want to break that down even more precisely and get at what I believe to be the heart of the matter. Okay, so the main idea that I'm trying to communicate is this. Here's my central premise. All right. Africans and people of African descent have rational grounds for affirming Christianity without having a sense that doing so is at odds with their ethnic identity. All right. That's kind of my central theme. So let me go ahead and repeat that. Africans and people of African descent have rational grounds for affirming Christianity without having a sense that doing so is at odds with their ethnic identity. All right. So with that said, let's go ahead and get it cracking. All right. Major point number 1. Africans and people of African descent have a deep and long-lasting relationship with Christianity that predates and extends far beyond what happened during the transatlantic slave trade, slavery, and colonization. Now, honestly, Kalam, I think this is honestly just a matter of preserving our heritage, when it comes to this white man's religion thing. I think that, hopefully that'll become clear. But I think we just do ourselves a disservice when we just entirely write it all off as the white man's religion. So hopefully we can, clear some, set the record straight. You know what I'm saying? We're just going to hit on some highlights of African history, church history, to illustrate the point that I'm trying to get at. Now, we could honestly begin, this part of our discussion by strolling through the pages of the Bible itself and taking note of the Africans in Scripture. We could talk about Simon the Niger, mentioned in Acts chapter 13. We could talk about, of course, the Ethiopian eunuch, or even perhaps, the author of the Gospel of Mark. But I understand that, in these sorts of conversations, people take exception to folks using the Bible to defend Christianity. So we'll just bypass that for now. We'll stick to the strictly historical side, non-biblical historical side. With that said, there is every indication that before the close of the 1st century, Christianity had already reached Africa, particularly in Egypt. Now, we can debate in terms of how it got there, but we actually see it reflected in the book of Acts, where you do have a guy named Apollos who apparently was spreading the gospel in Alexandria, Egypt. But aside from that, though, the Coptic church tradition holds that Christianity was introduced in Egypt by Mark the Apostle, who is reportedly martyred in Alexandria later on. I mean, listen, man. It would be a complete understatement to say that Alexandria was crucial to the early church, as Alexandria quickly becomes one of the 4 main localities of the Christian church, alongside Rome, Antioch, and of course, Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, before the close of the 2nd century, you have the first Christian school of theology anywhere on the planet. The first Christian school of theology was started right there in Alexandria, Egypt. All right. The attendees of this Alexandrian catechetical school is basically like a who's who, of the figures in the early church. We could talk about guys like Origen, who some consider to be the father of systematic theology, Bishop Demetrius, Clement of Alexandria, Didymus the Blind, Heraclius, Pantheus, just many others. Okay, the influence of these theologians from the Alexandrian school certainly helped to set the tone for scholarship and critical thinking in the early church. Now, it shouldn't surprise us at all that Christianity spread, to Egypt and parts of North Africa relatively quickly if we keep in mind that Christianity began as a messianic sect among Hebrews, and Hebrews had already been living throughout parts of Kemet and North Africa for centuries before the Christian movement began. So naturally, the events concerning Jesus and the Christian movement could travel to these areas in Africa through kinship networks, or perhaps those who made pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Passover or something like that, and then returned to their homes in Africa. Now, in a work entitled Apology, written in about 197 AD, African theologian references the rapid spread of Christianity in North Africa. He writes, quote, "We are but of yesterday, and already we have filled every place among you, cities, islands, fortresses, towns, marketplaces, the camps and tribes, companies, palaces, senates and forms, and so on," end quote. All right. Now, in addition, to this textual evidence from Tertullian, the presence of Christianity in 2nd century North Africa has been archaeologically confirmed. Okay, let me just pause for a second. I meant to mention this earlier, but I'll be running through a slew of references. I think I got like 20 different references in my bibliography, and I posted it just for the sake of me not having to go, quote every single one. I posted it at trueidpodcast.com, so you can, check my references there, and fact check me if you want. It's all facts right here, all facts, all daggers, all day. So anyway, archaeologists have unearthed a burial ground that spans over 5 kilometers in Hadramawet, North Africa. This burial ground has been dated to have been, used between the 2nd and 4th century, and they've counted approximately 15,000 graves in this burial site alone, many of which bear Christian inscriptions and motifs, such as images of the Good Shepherd, the dove, and the so-called, Jesus fish. Historian Francois de Cray reports that further evidence suggests that churches had been planted in Carthage before the end of the 1st century. Now, beyond that, we see Christianity springing up in all sorts of places in Africa, within a few centuries following the beginning of the Christian movement. All right. Dr. de Cray proposes that Christianity spread so rapidly due to patterns of urbanization that was going on in North Africa, even prior to the involvement of the Romans, coming into those areas. And so it was in the urban areas that Christianity was able to gain a foothold and get some momentum. Moving on, from the 3rd century, 2nd or 3rd century, we see Christianity showing up in what is now Algeria, Tunisia, further over into Mauritania, Libya. Of course, we have Aksum, Ethiopia, being declared a Christian nation under King Azana in the 4th century. Man, archaeologists have unearthed Christian churches in Ethiopia that date back 1,500 years. I've had the privilege of traveling to Ethiopia myself, actually. It's a beautiful place. Lots of history there. Definitely enjoyed myself. Great food, too. If you ever go to Ethiopia, the food is banging. I'm telling you right now. Anyway, I like to eat, so I'm going to just leave that alone. Just another quick note about Kemet, as a matter of fact. There was a brother by the name of Frumentius, who a lot of people are familiar with. He's credited for having brought the gospel to King Azana. Now, listen to this. To give an account of his progress in evangelizing Aksum, Frumentius wanted to report to the nearest major Christian city of the success that he was having. So where did he go? He reported back to Athanasius, the bishop of Alexandria. All right. And in turn, Athanasius ordains Frumentius as a missionary and then sends him back to Aksum. Man, that just shows the centrality of Alexandria in early Christianity, bro. Matter of fact, we really want to break it down. Talk about Athanasius. We got a lot of people out here talking about the Council of Nicaea, bro. I see it all over the internet, and people don't even understand how it started. The whole Council of Nicaea came about due to a biblical debate that was taking place prior to the Council of Nicaea amongst Alexandrian bishops and patriarchs. That's how the whole thing sparked off. Why? Because Alexandria was a hub of theology. And so what happened is Athanasius, Bishop Alexander, they started debating with this guy Arius. I'm saying they're getting it in. They give Arius the boot. And then, he ends up spreading his stuff elsewhere. And that's really how the Council of Nicaea comes about. So literally the most central council in the early church came about due to a theological debate amongst Africans. I'm saying, just think about that. All right. Of course, man, you got, in ancient Nubia, which converted to Christianity under King Silko in 450 AD and maintains a strong presence up to about the 14th century. Now, just think about it, man. I mean, we got all of this history of Christianity in Africa before the transatlantic slave trade even begins. As a matter of fact, if you don't quote me on this, but I think this is correct. If you take a look at the different nations that took part in the transatlantic slave trade, you got like the Dutch, you have the French, the Portuguese, Spain, and the British. I want to say the oldest of those republics would be the British. They may be back to the earliest, at the earliest, the 5th century, in terms of having any resemblance to today. Now, what that means is that Christianity had been flourishing in Africa for at least 4 centuries before these European nations that enslaved us later on even existed. I'm saying, just think about it. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna keep on going, man. So anyway, aside from that, I just gotta throw this in there. If we really want to make it interesting, we could talk about how the Congo of Central West Africa converted to Catholicism in 1491 under King Nzinga, which later on presented an interesting problem when slavery began in the British colonies, because back then, under the common law in Britain, it was illegal to own a Christian as a slave. Yet you had people being enslaved from the Congo and parts of Angola that were already professing to be Christians. But man, maybe we can yeah. I see your hand raised.
My brother, you was mentioning earlier on about Arius, and you was talking about obviously the Alexandrian schools and so forth. Is it true that Arius was actually a Libyan?
You know, actually, I've heard that. What makes it difficult is that you have terms like Libyan or the Black, or, you know, people from Cyrene. Sometimes it'll be used interchangeably with a region and not necessarily like a color or a ethnicity. So I really couldn't say definitively, you know, that whether he was a Libyan or not, you know, because people could use that term and it could be interchangeable with, you know, it could be either color or, you know, excuse me, ethnicity or region. So I wouldn't want to, you know, step out and say whether or not. Yeah.
All right. Continue, King.
Okay, cool. Let's see. All right, so yeah, I've covered a lot of that, man. Now, it's important to remember that when I'm talking about Christianity spreading through Africa, I'm not talking about Africans being preached to by outsiders and just going along for the ride with this whole Christianity thing, okay? Excuse me. From the earliest days of church history, we see Africans taking a lead role in the building of the church, whether it be the formulation of key doctrines, instituting certain religious practices, like the council format. You know, we can trace that back to African practices, or even contributing to philosophical development within the Christian worldview. You know, now let me just give you like 3 examples in terms of the types of folks that I'm talking about. Now, again, I'm dealing with 2,000 years of church history here, so I can't do justice to all this information I'm bringing forth, but I just want to give the audience a taste to kind of undergird my my first claim here. So let's just kind of throw out a couple of names. Abba Antony. Okay. Abba Antony was born around 251 AD in Heracleopolis, Magna, Egypt. He was reportedly of indigenous Coptic descent, according to Dr. Andrew Walls. I have him listed on my bibliography so people can fact check that. You know, we find our best information about him from the writings of Athanasius, who was an early African theologian that I mentioned earlier. Now, in Abba Antony's day, you know, the deep jungle was considered to be the place where demons held authority. I actually think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in some Kemetic traditions, it's kind of something similar where they believe that beyond the Nile was like the area of chaos or something like that, kind of something similar. So that's kind of the idea that you have in terms of, you know, where Abba Antony lived as far as the bush. He made a name for himself by leaving his village and then going out into the wilderness for a long period of time, which was something that back then they just didn't do, you know. Now, as the story goes, he comes back to the village, you know, just beat up and disheveled, and the villagers believe that was a result of his struggle with the negative spirits and just beasts of the wilderness, you know. But he goes back out there and remains out there for an extended period of time. Now, after a while, you know, by him being able to survive in the wilderness, it was considered to be a triumph over those demons and negative spirits out there in the bush. And so therefore the villagers where he was at decided, hey, you know, his God must be more powerful, you know, than these, you know, evil spirits that we've been so afraid of all this time. So that actually inspires a movement of people who actually go out there with him in the wilderness, and it kind of becomes a commune. Now, here's the reason why this is important. Okay, because what you have here with Abba Antony is the beginnings of Christian monasticism. Okay, all these Christian monks and nuns out here and all this kind of stuff today, it all goes back, it all traces back to Abba Antony, the African. Okay, because what happens is Athanasius writes a book about Abba Anthony describing his triumph over the wilderness, and it becomes like back then like a bestseller. It was preserved, for whatever reason, even in the West, and it just inspired, the monasticism that we see today. But all that Christian monasticism traces back to Abba Anthony, the African. All right, we'll keep it moving. Tertullian, I've mentioned him a second earlier. Tertullian was on the scene between about 155 to 240 AD in Carthage, North Africa. He's reported to be of Berber descent. There's a historian by the name of David Wilhite who's written extensively on Tertullian's indigenous roots in Africa. There's a wealth of things that we can learn from Tertullian's writings in terms of just the different movements, like the Montanists that were around at the time, church practices, and so on. But I want to highlight one thing in particular. Okay. And actually, matter of fact, I think this came up on your show, Kalam, maybe a week or so ago. The concept of the Trinity. There's no doubt about it that the concept of the Trinity is, if not the most, one of the most central doctrines to Christianity. Right? It's one thing that makes Christianity, in some senses, distinct. No question about that. Now, where do you think we get the word Trinity from? Tertullian. Tertullian is referred to some as the father of Latin theology because he wrote his theological works in Latin and is believed to be the first to do so. Now, one of the works that we have from Tertullian is an in-depth biblical defense of the concept of the Trinity. The word Trinity comes from the Latin word Trinitas, and Tertullian is credited for likely being the first to bring the word Trinitas or Trinity to the forefront of Christian theology, which is no small feat. If you can write something and your terminology on a particular topic becomes the standard way of expressing a theological concept for centuries to come, then I would say that's pretty daggone important. I'm saying everybody using the term Trinity today, it traces back to an African theologian. I'm saying one more. I got to mention my boy, one of the all-time greats, St. Augustine. Now, I ain't gonna lie to you, what I'm saying? And we can get, and I'm sure that the whole question of whitewashing will come up. So I'm just going to throw it out there now. Growing up, I'd heard of St. Augustine, but he's always depicted as like this white dude with the white beard or whatever. You know what I'm saying? I had no idea this cat was from Africa, but he was straight African, right? He flourished between 354 and 420 AD. He's from a place called Tagas, North Africa, reportedly of Berber descent. As a side note, I think that they based that on his mom's side. Her name was Monica, and based upon what they found in ancient grave sites, apparently Monica was a common Berber name. So that's one of the reasons that historians will say he's an African. As a matter of fact, actually, even more so than that, if you look at his writings, and I wanted to have the direct quotes for you, but maybe I can post it later on. But there's like 3 instances where he calls out other theologians for forgetting that they was Africans. I'm saying they was basically perpetrating, and in a sense, he kind of calls them Uncle Toms of that day. There's like 3 instances where he does that. So Augustine was no joke. I mean, he was serious about his Africanness. I'm saying, let that be known. Now, there's no way that I can give a brief summary of Augustine's accomplishments and do justice to his memory, because he's kind of like, it's like how you have Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird. Maybe even LeBron James now. When it comes to just Christian theologians and thinkers, he's like one of those guys. Okay. I actually have all of his collected writings right here at the crib right now. We got this joint. I don't know if y'all can see it. This thing right here. This is all Augustine right here. And it's maybe about 8 of these, this size, all Augustine's writings. I mean, just think about that. Like right here in my hands, I'm holding the words of an African theologian from like 1600 years ago, man. That's heritage right there. That's heritage. All right. So let me see. Where I'm at, man. So, this guy's writings talking about it, particularly Confessions and City of God, are considered to be theologically foundational to movements like the Protestant Reformation, which is one of the most significant shifts in history of all time. In his day, he played a vital role in the prose and heretical movements, and he just really framed a theological discussion in the Western world. Like, y'all really got to do the knowledge on this cat, man. Augustine, a lot of the political thought, legal thought, theology in the Western world goes back to Augustine. I'm saying it's so crucial that we understand that. Even ideas like separation of church and state goes back to his work, City of God. Like, you really got to do the research on that. If you're just interested in history, I'm saying, you got to research this guy. He's one of the most influential writers of all time, and he was an African Christian. All right. So, there I just gave you 3 Africans of the earliest church. And from them, we had the beginnings of Christian monasticism, theological advancements on central Christian doctrines like the Trinitarian concept, and one of history's most impactful writers of all time, all indigenous Africans. All right. It's just crazy, man. So I can actually, for each one of those, I could give you 10 more, to be honest, but we would be here all night. Now, I'm going to really bring this first point home in just a second, but I first want to address a couple common objections that I run into when I start talking about African Christianity. All right. First of all, I hear people say, well, the places that you named are from North Africa or East Africa, but the transatlantic slave trade took place in West Africa. Now, my response to that is, quite frankly, I think that's a double standard. All right. People from the conscious community lay claim to history and heritage from all parts of the African continent, all eras, all times of the on the African continent. Obviously, Pan-Africanists do the same, whether it be Kemet, the Congo, the Dogon, the Yoruba, the Ewe, the Dahomey. Like, people, they claim them all, right? So, why can't I do that? I mean, if you got people over here in the U.S. claiming Kemet, okay, cool. I can claim my brothers and sisters from Kemet who was Christians. It's the same thing. There's just no need for a double standard there. All right. Number two, one of the main objections I hear is, well, okay, Christianity was whitewashed. It's different here in the West. It was whitewashed. And see, that's interesting, because when you think about it, to say that Christianity was whitewashed implies that Christianity must not have been white to begin with. You know what I'm saying? So it would make absolutely no sense to whitewash it if Christianity was white in the first place, right? So now, that being said, to be a Christian, you're essentially holding to the message, mission, and sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and by extension, the apostolic teachings. Okay. So even if it were true that the way in which I practice Christianity, in terms of like my rituals or whatever, maybe even some interpretation influence, the aspects of Christianity that are most essential to being a disciple of Christ flow directly from the ministry and teachings of Christ himself and the apostles, which obviously predate whatever people would want to attribute to European influence. So every time I open the Bible and read it for myself, I'm engaged in teachings that predate and are true independent of European involvement. And it's those core teachings that are a bridge of agreement between me and whoever else of the Christian community, including my East African brothers and sisters in Christ. Well, so with that said, let me wrap up this first point, man. We're just getting warmed up, bro. This is the easy question. We're gonna get to the hard stuff in a second. So just to wrap up this first point, here we go. It is evident, going back to the earliest periods of church history, Africans have neither been latecomers nor bystanders when it comes to Christianity. Centuries before the transatlantic slave trade, Christianity was well established on the continent, and Africans played pivotal roles in the very development of the Christian movement. Now, look, we just had a sampling, an hors d'oeuvre of 2,000 years of African church history. We can look at African church history and easily find connecting points with Christianity. Africans like Augustine that I named. We could talk about Cyprian, Moses the Ethiopian, also known as Moses the Black, Perpetua, and just a host of others. And still, we got people out here who want to write Christianity off entirely as the white man's religion and throw away 2,000 years of just authentic Christianity on the continent of Africa, right? Jesus, right? I mean, we all know daggone well that Jesus was not like this blonde hair, blue eyed dude, walking around Jerusalem. I mean, that's obviously silly. He was clearly a man of color. So when you think about it, you mean to tell me, on the basis of what some white slave masters did, I'm going to throw away the most influential melanated man to walk this earth in the last 2,000 years? That's crazy. That's crazy. Look, if you believe that slave owners, robbed us of our heritage, I understand. And based on what they did, I mean, if you're going to deny yourself 2,000 years of authentic African Christianity, then you're actually cooperating with the perpetuation of the so-called white supremacy that you believe to be the problem in the first place. Facts. You know what I'm saying? I can stay on that, right there, but I'm gonna keep it moving. Kalam, did you want to jump in here, man, or I can keep rolling? I got bars, man. It's up to you.
You're dropping some bombs right about now. I really want to see the comments. I want to get some comments in right now. Comment section. Let me know what you're saying. So far I'm seeing, who's this? The red. It's going fast. The red, the blue. Scholar says, talk with the Titans. You're doing your thing. They're going in, and they're like, wow, Kalam's channel, Titans TV, is very eclectic. It's got people from everywhere, all different types of faiths joining in with discussions. So far, they're loving the information, King. I can't even see not one bad word so far. But I want somebody to critique this information, because this is powerful information. Where's the naysayers at? But I know,
Oh, I'm sure there'll be some in a minute. Yeah, I got some more to say. I'm sure they'll have beef with, but that's cool though. Hey, I'm loving it, bro. I'm having fun, man.
all right, let's go. Let's keep and get in, man.
Okay, cool. So what I want to do is I want to move on to my second major point. Okay, so we already talked about African Christianity. Now we're moving into what I call the hard question. Dealing with the transatlantic slave trade, and I'm all about specificity. So let me kind of give this caveat. Given my audience here. With this discussion, I will primarily focus on slavery within the context of the British colonies, America, and Britain. Okay, I'm just very particular about certain things. When you get into the French and the Spanish, the laws are different and stuff like that. So I want to make sure that if anybody fact checks, but they know that I know what I'm talking about. All right. So second point. All right, second major point. The belief that Christianity is the white man's religion is largely based upon an incomplete assessment of the historical evidence available to us today. All right. Now, as we'll see in a moment, having a correct understanding of, quote, slave religion, I think is just a matter of upholding the dignity of our ancestors, our forefathers. All right. Hopefully, we'll be able to make that clear. Now this is interesting. I mean, and I'm kind of giving you part of my journey as well, because I think that it kind of give a context to where I'm coming from. When I first began looking into this issue, of slavery and Christianity for myself, I thought I had a pretty good idea of how Africans experienced Christianity during the slave era. If any of you are like me, there's like this idea of the angry white slave master with a Bible in one hand and a bullwhip in the other, beating Christianity into the African, slave, kind of like that classic scene from Roots where Kunta Kinte gets beaten into taking on the name Toby. I figured that's just how it went down, in the story. But then as I was reading through a collection of slave narratives, all right, slaves conveying their experiences in their own words, I came across a passage that really shocked me. And actually, I got it right here, a quote I want to share with you guys right quick so you can hear where I'm coming from. All right. Now, these are the words of a former slave by the name of John Brown, who's describing what Sundays were like on the plantation where he was at. And he talks about how it was pretty much light work, on that Sunday, and everybody would gather at the slave master's house for, the church meeting. Now, listen to what he says here. This is really what caught me off guard. All right. So in John Brown's words, quote, Master John's wife would start the meeting with a prayer and then would come the singing, the old timey songs. But the white folks on the next plantation would beat their slaves for trying to do like we did. No praying there and no singing, end quote. Now, this really struck me, as odd at first, because again, my understanding was that slave masters used Christianity as a means to control the slaves, keep them in their place, beat it into them, and so on. But John Brown here is reporting how slave masters were actively keeping their slaves from practicing Christianity. Now, this was the first time the light bulb really went off for me, and just kind of it occurred to me that there was a diversity of ways in which slaves came into contact with or experienced Christianity, not just the one scenario that I was familiar with. Okay, there was more, much more to the story than I realized. Nobody told me these things. Okay, now let's explore that a little bit. All right. I think most people out there are probably like me, right? They formed their ideas about Christianity during slavery times based upon that single Kunta Kinte scenario I described. But you see, that's just one piece of the puzzle, right? As a side note, I think that, when it comes to history, the idea of a puzzle is actually kind of helpful, because just like a real puzzle, the more pieces that you have in place, you can better see what the picture is. And with history, the more facts, that we have to work with, the better we can interpret what was going on in the past. That's just kind of how history works. Now, like I said before, I'm not here to make excuses for the church. Far from it. Please understand that. What I do want to do, I want to look at 5 facts of history concerning Christianity during slavery and add those facts to our puzzle, and then see where that leads us in terms of our picture and what was going on back in slavery times. All right, so just kind of pace with me here. We got 5 facts. Fact number 1, a significant number of slave owners actively opposed the preaching of the gospel to their slaves. All right. Now, I hear a lot of folks, today asking the question, why did our oppressors give us the Bible? Or something along those lines. I think that's a valid question. I think an equally valid question is, why is it, when you look at the historical record, why is it that for significant portions of the slave era, the slave masters actively prevent Christianity from being given to the slaves? All right. Now, I'm just, as a side note, I hear a lot of people just online, I'll see them kind of throw that that book out there written by Charles Colcock called How to Make a Negro Slave. I mean, a Negro Slave, a Christian. I didn't have this in my notes, but I just want to say as a side note that most people, I guarantee you, haven't actually read that book. Because if you did, and you looked at page 14, you would see why he was writing it. The reason why he wrote that is because slave masters were opposing preachers and preaching the gospel, and he was trying to persuade them otherwise. But I can get in deeper there, but we'll just leave that alone for now. But in her article entitled "The Ultimate Sin: Christianizing Slaves in Barbados in the 17th Century," Dr. Catherine Gerber puts it this way, quote, "The slave owner's initial confusion about the consequences of slave conversion is representative of a more general confusion about the repercussions of Christianity on slavery in the Protestant Atlantic world. Slave owners did not know whether they would be forced to free or eventually manumit their slaves if the latter were converted to Christianity. Listen to this. Some were also concerned that Christianity would give slaves dangerous ideas about freedom and allow them to become too similar to their Christian masters." End quote. Now, it was a very reasonable fear for them to think that slaves would be freed on the basis of them becoming Christians. That it was real for them to think that was a real possibility because at the time, according to English common law, it was illegal to own someone who was a Christian. Now, actually, if you do the research among the Dutch, you did have some settlements in the mid 1600s that did free their African slaves on the basis of those slaves being baptized, which kind of put a fear in some of these Europeans like, oh, snap, well, if these folks get baptized, then we got to give them up. Right now, aside from that, throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, there were a number of legal cases in which African slaves attempted to use this to their advantage and petition for freedom on the basis of them having been baptized. In the U.S., we see the examples of this in cases like Felix's petition to a Massachusetts court in 1773, Peter Best's petition for freedom in 1773, a petition made by a number of Africans to Judge Thomas Gage in 1774. As a matter of fact, I want you guys to listen to an excerpt from the petition, a petition made by a slave to Thomas Gage in 1773. And I want you to really key on the argumentation that this African is making to petition for his freedom. Okay, quote, "By our deplorable situation, we are rendered incapable of showing our obedience to Almighty God. How can a slave perform the duties of a husband to a wife or parent to his child? How can a husband leave master and work and cleave to his wife? How can the wife submit themselves to their husband in all things? How can the child obey their parents in all things?" And see, what the petitioner is doing here is showing how the conditions of slavery do not allow for the enslaved person to fulfill what God requires of us all. And the implication is, therefore, slavery itself is against God's moral law. And therefore, on the basis of God's law, the judge should grant freedom to the petitioner. So again, this petitioner is identifying as a Christian, and on that basis, contending for his freedom by appealing to Christian principles. I'm saying, again, I put this in my bibliography, so y'all can fact check me on that as well. You see, this is a principal reason why slave owners stood firmly against Christianity being preached to the slaves, because they saw slaves as property and didn't want to lose that so-called property due to an African slave becoming a Christian. That's why in the early 1700s, where I live here in Virginia, I think it was in 1705, you see laws being passed in the colonies that specifically try to end the legal debate about baptism being grounds for slaves to be freed. They were also well aware that elements of Christianity that promoted liberty and equality among people of all races, were interwoven with Christianity. And obviously slaves didn't want Africans to get any ideas about that either. So that's number one. Slave masters actively oppose the preaching of the gospel to their slaves. Fact number two, there is substantial evidence of slaves practicing Christianity on their own terms. Now, this gets kind of interesting. So in his book entitled Slave Religion, The Invisible Institution, Dr. Albert Raboteau, he's a professor emeritus, I think it's from Princeton University, African-American scholar. He explains how African slaves were able to make a distinction between hypocritical slave owner Christianity and authentic Christianity. In great detail, Dr. Raboteau describes how this understanding among slaves about the slave masters practicing this false version of Christianity prompted the slaves to practice Christianity independently and hidden from their slave owners. Slaves would steal away, at night deep into the woods where they would gather and hold their own prayer meetings and worship services. If they were caught by the patrollers, they were at risk for being severely beaten. As a matter of fact, we have slave narratives where a slave preacher describes being beaten for facilitating one of these meetings, and then those who attended had to, basically snitch on the other ones who was there, and then they got beat too. So it wasn't no small thing, man. They actually risked their safety to break away at night and go to what they called hush harbors. So in order to make sure that they weren't heard during these night worship sessions, I mean, these slaves are smart, man. So they had a couple of different techniques to keep themselves from being heard. Out in the woods, they would fill a basin with water, and whoever was praying or encouraging others or speaking or whatever, they would speak into the basin of water to muffle the sound. In another slave narrative, it's reported that they would create like an enclosed area by hanging up, the wet blankets around them, again to muffle the sound. These are smart folks, man, some survivors. So again, these meetings were called hush harbors. And actually, just to illustrate, kind of what we're talking about here, I just love hearing from the ancestors, man. So I use a lot of their quotes, throughout my presentation. You know what I'm saying? Actually, even in my own prayer time, usually before or after I read the Bible, I'll read like a slave narrative. I just find it to be encouraging. So these are the words of Lucretia Alexander. She said, quote, "The slaves didn't go to the church building. The preacher came and preached to them in their quarters. He would just say, serve your masters, don't steal your master's turkey, don't steal your master's chicken, don't steal your master's hogs, don't steal your master's meat, do whatever your master tells you to do. Same old thing all the time. My father would have church in the dwelling houses, and they had to whisper. Sometimes they would have church at his house. Now that would be when they would want a real meeting with some real preaching." All right. So see how she draws a distinction there between the slave master Christianity and what she called a real meeting with some real preaching. Also, we got a second one here. This is W.L. Boss. Just another quick quote. Quote, "Us slaves never had a chance to go to Sunday school and church." Listen to what he says here. "Us slaves never had a chance to go to Sunday school and church. The white folks feared for slaves to get any religion and education. But I reckon something inside just told us about God, and there was a better place hereafter. We would sneak off and have prayer meetings. Sometimes the patrollers would catch us and beat us good, but that didn't keep us from trying." I mean, it's just so powerful, man. Like this is not me making this up. These are our ancestors speaking in their own words. Okay. Now I don't know about y'all, but when I came up, you didn't loud talk your ancestors. I'm saying, like, you didn't, come in a room correcting folk. I'm saying, if my grandma was speaking, I didn't speak over it. And that's kind of how I feel like what we do with our ancestors is, we're like, oh, nah, they just didn't know any better. And they were just so mentally, impoverished. They couldn't know any better. You know what I'm saying? But we just got to hear what they have to say for themselves, give them that dignity, I think, So again, this was a very active yet informal system of Christianity, which existed independently from and was in many ways counter to the slave master version of Christianity. All right. Moving right along. I'm gonna make this quick. Fact number 3. For many slaves, conversion to Christianity was in itself a form of personal resistance against the system of slavery. Now, we have to really grasp the mindset that was floating around Europe during the period in which slavery was in full swing. Dr. Audrey Smedley really lays this out, and I've included her works in the notes that I gave you. But in order to justify enslaving Africans, you had the intellectual elites of that era buying into the belief that Africans were literally less than human, didn't have souls, or maybe at best were childlike subhumans that needed more developed races to take care of them for their own good, kind of this paternalism type thing. So the very personhood and human dignity that we all share was denied to the Africans. However, as these ideas were being imposed upon Africans through not only physical slavery, but also the ideological oppression behind it, Christian conversion provided Africans with an escape hatch from the mentality that they were lesser beings. In a sense, converting to Christianity was like a personhood equalizer, in that slaves found their worth, dignity, and personhood in God and authority much higher than their oppressors. Now, Kalam, if you just forgive me for this, somewhat of a lengthy quote, but it's just, Dr. Rabbitoe kind of bangs it out right here. I just got to read this joint. I really want to just kind of anchor what I'm saying in some scholarship. So this is Dr. Rabbitoe, quote.
Before you do that, King, I would just like I would like some feedback, people. If you're enjoying the show, please hit us with a thumbs up. We got like 22 likes right now. I ain't continuing until I get that 30th like at least. Come on, fam. We've got 123 people tuned in right now. 124 people tuned in right now. Come on, man.
Nice.
Give us some likes. Give us some likes. Let us know that you're enjoying the show. We're up here. We're doing this for you. We're trying to give you this information, this alternative information. We rarely get, the perspective of Christians on the show. So this is a wonderful phenomenon right now, especially a Christian who is very much astute and informed with the African history in regards to Christianity. Especially we're going into what the slaves on the plantation field was actually going through as well. Wow. Oh, hold on. That jumped real quickly. That jumped real quickly. That was 35 likes now. I'm loving that. All right,
okay.
Cool. Let me give it back to you because they surpassed what I was expecting. So
nice.
Go ahead, King.
Hey, appreciate you, bro. Appreciate it. Just much love to everybody out here watching, man. I love y'all, man. So let me give you this quote from Dr. Albert Rabateau. And then again, this goes back to the point of how Christianity conversion was a personhood equalizer, as I termed it. Okay. So check this out. Quote, for slaves facing the dehumanizing conditions of enslavement, the daily physical, psychological, and emotional attacks against their dignity as persons, to experience the total acceptance and affirmation of themselves by God, contradicted at a fundamental level the force of the very system bent on denigrating their humanity. In the conversion experience, slaves realize it in the heart, not just the head, that they were of infinite value as children of God, chosen from eternity to be saved. Now, amidst a system bent on reducing them to an inferior status, the experience of conversion rooted deep within the slave convert's psyche, a sense of personal value and individual importance that helped to ground their identity in the unimpeachable authority of Almighty God. Man, y'all just gotta chew on that. I mean, go back and run that tape back, later on. But I said a lot there. But just just reading that kind of reminds me of my personal favorite slave narrative. I've read it several times of a guy named Josiah Henson, and a Reverend Josiah Henson, I should say. And basically, he escaped from slavery, moved up to Canada. Eventually, he actually ended up in the UK for a period of time, as a matter of fact. He became an international icon, even meeting with president at one point. I can't remember which one it was, but when he came back to the States, he had an audience with the president. And so when he comes back to the States at one point, he's married now, and he wants to show his wife the old plantation that he grew up on. And so he just tells this vivid story, man. As a matter of fact, I think his autobiography is free online, so I can put it in the comments after we're done here. But he tells this interesting story about how he goes back to the old plantation. It's just kind of overrun with, just forest. It's just run down and all that. And his slave master that he was under had passed away, but the slave master's wife was still alive. And so he just talks about how he goes into the slave master's wife, and she doesn't recognize him at first. She's like sickly and old and that kind of stuff. She's not doing well. And so it took her a little while to recognize him. But when she finally does, she says, "Oh, Josiah, your master is dead and gone." And his reply was this: "No, madam, my master is alive," referring to Jesus Christ. Now, it's just powerful because it's just simple yet profound, because it really gives us a glimpse into what Christian conversion looked like for the slave. In giving themselves over to the lordship of Jesus Christ, the slaves found liberty from their earthly master through submission to the one who is master of all. It's just a powerful, kind of illustration of what Christ is really all about. So let's move on to the next point. Fact number 4: Christianity provided a framework for public resistance of slavery. This is one of my favorite subjects, but when I speak of public resistance, I'm primarily talking about the abolitionist movement, but there's actually other directions I could go with this as well. Even going back to the 1800s, you've got Black evangelical churches organizing boycotts of slave produced products, being politically active and working against the ideas of the time that Black people were of lesser stock than whites. As far as abolitionists go, it's just so many people that I could just throw out right here. It's just crazy. Honestly, Kalam, like if somebody comes at me, when people come at me with like this white man religion stuff, I'm like, look, if you don't have at least the basic knowledge of Frederick Douglass, who was threatened with death for trying to teach the Bible, Olaudah Equiano, who, as a matter of fact, he lived where I am in Virginia, and he was also in England as well for a period of time. Archibald Caguano, the two of them formed the Sons of Liberty, as an abolitionist in the abolitionist movement. William Wilberforce, William Lloyd Garrison, Henry Highland Garnett, John Rock, Jermaine Wesley Le Guin, the Grimke sisters. I mean, I could go on, man. I mean, if you don't have a basic knowledge of these cats, I mean, dog, like we just honestly can't even have a constructive conversation. You know what I'm saying? Because I mean, you just got to get in this history. Got to get in his history. Matter of fact, I could take it further than that. We could talk about Gabriel Prosser. We could talk about Moses Dixon and the Knights of Tabor. We could talk about my man, Toussaint Louverture. I got to do the knowledge on Toussaint, who was a devout Catholic. We could just go on forever. But like seriously, like if you don't know the basics about these guys, who if you look in their speeches and writings, they employ Christian concepts, and scriptures in their fight against slavery. Then shoot, we just can't even like have like a real conversation, dog. Like you got to get in this knowledge first. You know what I'm saying? For example. Let me just throw out this quote right here. My man, Jermaine Wesley Le Guin, who was a noted clergyman and abolitionist. Now, in response to the 1850 fugitive slave law, he really exemplified this relation between Christianity and the anti-slavery activism. He says this, quote, "I owe my freedom to the God who made me, who stirred me to claim it against all other beings in God's universe. I received my freedom from heaven, and with it came the command to defend my title to it." You know what I'm saying? It was this dude was raw, man. Like again, Henry Highland Garnett. If you haven't read this man's speeches, you got to. You know what I'm saying? He's the same guy. He's like, there's 3 million Africans down there in the South. Raise up and fight. I'm saying he was a preacher. You know what I'm saying? And actually he was so radical that they wouldn't even deal with him in some circles, even in the abolitionist movement, because he was so raw with it. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, man, I'm gonna go ahead with that. But like even with that quote, like I said, with Jermaine Le Guin, like he considered it to be a God ordained moral duty for him to fight for freedom. That's just deep, like anyway. So people talk about, Christianity was used to keep us enslaved, so don't be a Christian. Well, honestly, I could use the same logic and say Christianity in the Bible was used to fight against slavery, so you should become a Christian. Now, in either case, both of those positions are illogical. Because whether Christianity was misused to promote slavery or used to fight against slavery, the more important question is, are the claims of Christianity true? To say that, Christianity was used to enslave us, so therefore don't be a Christian, is somewhat of a non sequitur, but we'll come back to that later. Fact number 5, this is the last one in this section. Slave songs and folk tales from that time depict the God of the Bible as a God of liberation, not oppression. Now, this is a very important point right here, okay? I provided quotations thus far from former slaves talking about practicing Christianity in their own way, using it as a means of personal or public resistance, and so on. Now, I know a lot of people might say, "Oh, well, yeah, there was, they were just kind of exceptions to the rule, or something like that." Well, we have to understand something, okay? The West Africans who were enslaved were coming from cultures that emphasize oral traditions and passing along culture through like song and folk tales and so forth. And what we see among the African slaves here in the West is a continuation of that means of passing down the ideas, morals, and beliefs that were prevalent among them. Okay. African theologian John Mbiti talks about how in the African context, theology is passed on through songs and sayings, whereas in some kind of literary culture is passed down through writing. And he just kind of draws the illustration between the two, just difference in culture. So as Lawrence Levine points out in his essay, Slave Songs and Slave Consciousness, when we look at the songs of the slaves and what they sang about, they take God and different figures from the Bible, i.e. Daniel, Moses, Joseph, kind of the main names, and they apply biblical stories to themselves in terms of deliverance from oppression in this world, triumphing over the powers that be, the payoff of perseverance, justice, and hope for the future. Now, there's no doubt the slaveholding Christians tried to instill the idea that slaves were supposed to remain as they were in that condition, but clearly this idea didn't take hold entirely, because through the lyrics of these slave songs, we see that the prevalent theme among the Africans was that the God of the Bible was on their side and would bring justice and set them free, whether in this life or the next. We have it documented, like I said, in Lawrence Levine's Slave Songs and Slave Consciousness. When it comes to around a time where the Civil War is popping off, you start to see these slave songs emerging, talking about the judgment of God coming against the South. You know what I'm saying? Like this was their mentality. God was not this oppressive, slave master backing up these earthly slave masters. Okay. So now, again, I'm not trying to make excuses for the Christians who participate in enslavement in Africa. That's not the point I'm trying to make. There's no excuse for them whatsoever. But check this out. And this is the point that I'm coming around to. If all we know about Christianity during the slavery era is basically an abusive relationship between African slaves and slave masters who claim to be Christian, then of course it would be understandable that we would look upon that history and say, well, there's nothing for me there, nothing for me to connect to, right? However, as we increase our knowledge and scope of our ancestors' experiences and adding more historical pieces to our puzzle, getting a clear view of what was going on back then, we're able to, broaden our lens in such a way that we're not locked into assessing that period of history based on the Kunta Kinte slave religion scenario alone. All of a sudden, based on the historical evidence, we're not forced to define Christianity based on what the false, hypocritical slave master perversion of it was. We see slave masters refusing to allow slaves to hear about Christianity for fear that they would lose their so-called property or get uppity and see themselves equal to whites. We see our ancestors, risking their safety to practice Christianity independently and on their own terms, and using Christianity as a basis of personal and public resistance, maintaining hope in a God of liberty and justice who sustained their sense of personhood in the midst of an evil slave institution. Now, when we bring these puzzle pieces together, these facts of history into the picture, we suddenly have a broader view by which we can affirm Christianity as represented among the slaves who survived and stood against slavery. We have a more complete picture by which I can, make a more historically responsible, evidence-based assessment of the dynamic between Christianity and the African slave. Now, with that, we find ourselves with connecting points. I'm using that phrase connecting points again for a reason. We find ourselves with connecting points with the true Christianity that so many of our ancestors latched onto in spite of the hypocritical religious institutions that were, quite frankly, on the wrong side of history. Now it's inevitable, people will say, basically the slaves didn't know any better. They were mentally oppressed and, bought into the slave master's religion. Now I'm not saying that there weren't a number of slaves who were, bamboozled by the perverse version of Christianity pushed by the slave masters. I mean, obviously there were, but to make a cookie cutter, blanket assessment of what Christianity was to the slaves as a whole, honestly, man, I just think it's an injustice to our ancestors, bro. It really undermines their dignity. I mean, listen. We're talking about a people group that survived one of the most heinous ordeals of human history. But, if you look at the years immediately following the Civil War, you see that within about a generation, Africans reduced their illiteracy among them by about 50%. Within 10 years of the Civil War ending, you have thousands of African-American elected officials, including some who obtained positions in the U.S. Congress. You have Africans making their way into the workforce. I mean, these are strong people. If people want to reject Christ for their own reasons, then so be it. But our forefathers and mothers weren't so mentally impoverished that we can't grant them the dignity of their own spirituality and choosing Christianity. You know what I'm saying? We got to respect that. So I can move on to my next major point. If you want to take a break there or, kind of for comments, or you want to keep rolling.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to take some comments. I've got some brothers and sisters who should be jumping onto the panel very shortly. There's a lot of people that definitely want to have their say. Sure. So this is going to be very, very interesting. I just want to quickly backtrack with you just to ask you a question here, because I know a lot of people might be thinking about it. So let me ask you it anyway. So first question is, earlier on you talked about the African presence in Christianity during the early centuries, first, second, third, and fourth centuries, with the schools in Alexandria, etc., etc. And then you also talked about the West Africans who were enslaved, who were drawn towards Christianity as well. So my question to you is this: we know that the early Africans adopted Christianity, but we want to know, was the early evangelists and founder of Christianity African, or were they of the Euro-Asian genetics as we see most Jews today?
That's a good question. So this is gonna get in somewhat to, I guess, maybe some Hebrew Israelites. I'm not a Hebrew Israelite, but put it this way. The first difficulty is, I think what happens is, based upon our experience, what we do is we read modern categories of race and ethnicity back into history. And I think that makes it difficult sometimes for us to really grasp what was going on with back then. That's the first hurdle. But I guess the question would be like, what does it mean to be African? You know what I'm saying? I don't mean to sound vague, but it's just like, I think that sometimes we apply an arbitrary marker in terms of what it means to be African. So like, let's say if you look at the end of the day, Christianity traces back to Africa. I mean, there's no question about that. You know what I'm saying? If you look at the New Testament, you're dealing with Christians, right? If you look at the Old Testament, people usually assume that you're dealing with Hebrews, but that's not exactly true. You know what I'm saying? Because before Abraham, you have worshipers of God, you know, who predated Abraham and are recognized as being worshiping the true God. You can talk about, you know, all sorts of people, whether it be Noah. Interestingly enough, you know, Melchizedek and the Jebusites who were in Jerusalem. We could talk about, you know, maybe depends on how you look at it, maybe Balaam. You know, it's just several Africans back there. So it's, I don't mean to be vague, but you know, at the end of the day, I would say the worship of the true God traces back to Africa. You know what I'm saying? And I think that the teachings that eventually that Christianity emerges out of, you know, they stem from Africa because that's where people come from anyway. So yeah, I don't know if that's too vague or not. Maybe we can make it more specific, you know, but I'm trying to avoid like getting into like a long theological discussion. But, you know, if we're talking about where the first century people who were Hebrews, were they from Africa? The answer would probably be some of them. You know, I think one of the mistakes that Hebrew Israelites make is that they kind of overreach and they want to make all the Hebrews African. You know, I don't think that that's accurate, but I think what you do is you have an amalgamation of people, some of which were definitely African. So for example, what's his name? Thomas Oden, he wrote a book called The African Memory of Mark. And he proposes a theory that the author of the Gospel of Mark was a Libyan, you know, was an indigenous Libyan. And so if that's true, then you would have, you know, the first gospel ever written was written by a Libyan, you know, if Thomas Oden is correct about that. So I don't know, maybe you want to come back on that. Maybe you can make it more specific, but, you know.
All right. All right. Also, who we got here? Who actually asked this question? Okay, I'm going to read it out anyway. It says here, which passages or quotes in the Bible are the ones that enslave people? The doctrine is one thing, but is there anything specific you could bring up?
Yeah, actually, as a matter of fact, in my presentation, I'm actually going to do a full breakdown of the Bible and Christian and slavery. But in terms of the ones that were used to enslave people, you would have to look at what says in, you know, slaves obey your masters. You know, that was taken out of context. They would use that, or they would typically go back to the Old Testament, use like the Levitical passages to say, oh, see here, look, we can enslave folks. As a matter of fact, shoot, I got a book. If you can hold, well, I can't, it's kind of outside my reach, but I have a book and I can put it up later that talks about the slave sermon, the sermons that were used for and against slavery, where people can kind of do a comparative study on, you know, what scriptures were used and things like that. But typically, you got to remember, like most of these slave masters, they weren't all that well educated either. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, they weren't out there, they weren't theologians per se. So they stick to the basics, like, you know, slaves obey your masters and kind of go from there. Interestingly enough, I don't know if it, you know, I don't know if it was big in the UK, but the Nat Turner movie, surprisingly, actually is a pretty good depiction of what you're dealing with, because you have the same scriptures they were using in that movie. That's kind of really how it was. Pretty true to history. So.
All right. And we've also got a question from Lamb of God, and they ask, Genesis 9:20 to 9:27. The curse of Ham was used to rape, torture, and enslave the Africans. They were castrated so they wouldn't gain entry to heaven. Okay. I think that was more of a comment rather than a question. I apologize. Also, we've got a couple members that have just come in from YouTube. I've actually put the link inside of the chat section of YouTube, which I normally don't do. Because I like to actually vet everybody. So we've got my brother Colin F here, and we've also got somebody by the name of King here also. So we're definitely going to have some input via our panel members very shortly. But I'm going to allow my brother to finish his presentation before anybody asks any more questions.
Okay, cool. So you want me to go ahead and move forward, or?
Yeah, please continue.
Okay, got you. What I can do is, how long you want me to do it? I can do a shortened version, or I could just keep running through it. I got some good stuff, but, you know, we just keep rolling, or what do you want me to do?
Yeah, we've got like about 20 more minutes, so just keep that in mind.
Okay, 20 minutes. All right, cool. So I'm just gonna basically um, we'll do the highlights. All right, cool. So let's start with my next major point. To reject Christianity on the basis of some Africans having become Christians during slavery is actually logically fallacious. It's literally illogical. So we're getting into a little bit of philosophy here. Let me just make this a shortened version. What some people may not be familiar with is what's called the genetic fallacy. Okay. Now, in philosophy, we could use, I think, the analogy of ice cream to discuss what a fallacy is. Okay. A fallacy is just a way of saying irrational thinking, a mistaken conclusion, or something like that. So just like ice cream, how it's a type of food, but you have different flavors. The same way, with fallacies, there's just different types of them. And so with a genetic fallacy as a working definition, it means to accept or reject a claim based on how someone came to believe it, rather than on the merits of that claim or proposition. Okay, so the underlying idea is that the reasoning behind the merits or credibility of a claim might be legitimate even if the origin of the claim is not. So just kind of do a little thought experiment with me right quick. All right, maybe the panel members might want to respond or whatever, but as a scenario, I think this will kind of help to illustrate why this is fallacious. So back in 2000, the popular adult cartoon series The Simpsons had an episode in which Donald Trump was elected president. Right now, obviously, who would have thought that a decade later that cartoon prophecy would come true? But here we are. Now, let's say that I had a cousin who had been in a coma since 1995, and I go to visit him every Sunday. And let's say that I visited him the Sunday after Donald Trump's inauguration. And as I enter my cousin's room, the nurse informs me that my cousin had awakened from his coma like 5 minutes before I arrived. So let's say I excitedly rush into my cousin's room, and the first thing he said to me is, "Wow, Donald Trump is president." And at this point, I asked my cousin like how he came out of the coma and yet knows Donald Trump is president. Now, let's say that my cousin responds to me by pointing to the television in his room, which just happens to be playing the rerun of the Simpsons episode in which Donald Trump was president. And he says to me, "I was watching this cartoon in which Donald Trump is president, so I figured it must be true." Now, to kind of illustrate my point, that's the scenario right there. To illustrate my point, let's ask two questions. Are cartoons reliable sources of information concerning political or real events? No, obviously. Was my cousin correct when he stated that Donald Trump is president? Yes. Now, in response to my cousin, it wouldn't make sense for me to say, the only reason you believe Donald Trump is president is because you saw it on a cartoon. Therefore, your statement about Donald Trump being president is false. That wouldn't make any sense. The more correct thing to say would be, I wouldn't recommend relying on cartoons for information, but you are correct that Donald Trump is president, and there are good reasons for holding that belief. So, like, what this scenario shows is there's a distinction between how somebody comes to know something and the merits of whether or not what they claim is true. Okay. Now let's bring this around. All right. This is the whole point. The genetic, again, if we apply the genetic fallacy to the white man's religion objection, if it is the case, that Jesus, walked the earth in first century AD, was crucified for our sins, proclaimed to be God, and, rose again from the grave, how is any of that all of a sudden false, or all of a sudden just didn't happen in the past because of the evil deeds of white slave owners 1,500 years after the fact? You know what I'm saying? That doesn't make sense. Regardless of how Africans of the diaspora came to believe Christianity is a separate issue from whether or not Christianity's central claims about Jesus in the first century are true. So again, when people come at me with stuff like, "Oh, the only reason you believe Christianity is true because it was beat into our ancestors," or, because if you were born in Arabia, you'd be a Muslim. I mean, those are all just different variations of the genetic fallacy, and there's just no reason for me to be compelled to, dip out on Christianity based on illogical arguments. Now, when you really think about it, I think a lot of people actually shoot themselves in the foot. And I really want you to kind of key in on this. So what people will say is, okay, well, you shouldn't be a Christian because it's the white man's religion. So basically what they're saying is, I'm black, and because the white man gave it to us or beat it into us, I'm not going to rock with it. I'm saying, now the interesting thing about that is, before the transatlantic slave trade, people on the African continent did not use color or blackness as a central identifier of who they were or how they distinguish themselves from others. I mean, we think about it, blackness becomes somewhat irrelevant if everybody black. You know what I'm saying? So they use things like, tribal affiliation, form of spirituality, body type, clan affiliation, markings on the skin, language, all those type of things they use to identify, who was with them and who was in other tribes or other groups. Okay. Now, during the transatlantic slave trade, European scientists and academics, and this is written up by Audrey Smedley, they came up with this idea of using physical features like bone structure, shape of the head, skin color to distinguish between and rank different people groups. These Europeans determined that white people as a group were superior and black people were inferior, and they used this as a justification for treating Africans like farm animals. Now, my point is this: blackness was not a central means of identification for African people. That race concept became instilled in us through the slavery, the same way that people claim Christianity was. Now, so if so many folks are saying that black people should reject Christianity because it came from white folks. Now, if that's where you're coming from, then when you're raising the objection about the so-called white man's religion, you're actually adopting the white man's race concept to do so. That kind of logic just shoots itself in the foot. Like, how can you come at me about the white man's religion while at the same time using the white man's race concept as the basis of your objection? It just doesn't make any sense. It's not logical, So for the sake of time, maybe if you want, we can do like another show. I'm saying, like, as far as slavery in the Bible, but I'm gonna kind of like maybe wrap up like my major points, and then kind of get up out of here. You know what I'm saying? It would let people ask questions rather. So the last of my major points. Skip on down here. I will say this though, it does help if you've actually studied the history and scripture when people kind of allege this thing between the Bible and slavery, because just no rational person could see them as being one and the same in the context of the Old Testament, and then with the transatlantic slave trade. But I'll just skip that for now. My last point, I'll just kind of sum it up, is the Christian worldview has an evidential basis and makes sense of things in such a way that makes it a rational position for anyone to hold, including people of African descent. Okay, and I'm just going to spell that out really quickly. All right. Earlier, I talked about, logic and evidence, and the question of whether or not Christianity is true being more crucial than how Africans came to believe it. Now what I see in the black community today is people, taking on different forms of spirituality and ideologies to fill that gaping hole, that identity wound, so to speak, that obviously has to do with our ancestors being torn from, their native lands, people, traditions, kinship networks, and so on. I see people, trying to resolve these things within themselves. And that's real. I just want to throw at y'all real quick, just Rob, maybe just for one more second, a snippet of how I kind of resolve that from the Christian perspective. And then we can get to like some questions and stuff like that. Now, I promise I wasn't going to preach to y'all, you know what I'm saying? But I'm going to talk about Jesus for a second, and but from a historical standpoint. Now, if Jesus really physically rose from the dead, I mean, like historically, like in real time, then that literally changes everything. All right. Now watch this. Most people don't realize, about the Christians' claim of Jesus' bodily resurrection is that it's a claim that is rationally defensible based on historical evidence that is agreed upon by a majority of professional historians today. There are a number of historical facts surrounding the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus that are widely agreed upon by both Christian and non-Christian scholars as being historically credible. Examples of these would be: 1, Jesus' death by crucifixion at the hands of the Romans. 2, Jesus' burial in an empty tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. 3, the tomb being found empty by a group of Jesus' female followers. 4, the original disciples had experiences after Jesus' crucifixion, which they believed to be interactions with the bodily resurrected Jesus of Nazareth. 5, the conversion of James, the brother of Jesus, to Christianity. And then number 6, the conversion of Paul, the Apostle Paul, to Christianity. Now, this brief list I just gave you, these aren't faith statements, okay? These are statements of history that are widely agreed upon by professionals in the field of history today, because by using the standard historical method that would be applied in verifying any other event in history, these facts are found to be well evidenced. We could do a whole show on that, man. It might be a good one to do. Now, when historians want to determine the historicity of something, like the resurrection, they gather the data together, the known facts, and then they evaluate different hypotheses that would be adequate to explain the known facts. Now, when you stack up the data, there's no naturalistic hypothesis about what happened to Jesus after his burial that has been found to account for the collection of the historical facts I've laid out. Theories like Jesus didn't actually die. Well, a lot of Muslims obviously hold to that, or I guess they all would because it says it in the Quran. The disciples lied and stole the body, hallucinated, and so on. Oh, I'm telling you, if you just do the research, over the years of scholarship, people have tried all these explanations, and time after time, these natural explanations come up short and lacking in their ability to explain the facts that I've given you. However, there is one hypothesis that has the explanatory power and the explanatory scope to account for these facts, and it is the explanation that the church has stood on for about 2,000 years. Namely, God has raised Jesus from the dead. Now, ride with me for just 1 second. I promise I'm in here. I promise. If Jesus rose from the dead, then at very least, it seems like we ought to take what he taught seriously. Now, I know our people were ripped from their homes, the people and culture. But if you take what Jesus says seriously, then when he says, "In my Father's house, there are many mansions, and I go to prepare a place to you," we're talking about a new home right there. When he says in John chapter 17, I pray that they be one, even as we're one. We're talking about, a new people right there, a people that will be building and communing for all eternity. I'm saying when he talks about the Old Testament and affirms the veracity of the Old Testament, well, I got to look at Genesis 1:26. I'm made in the image of God, right? Now, here's the thing, and this is where I'm in right here. There's something more foundational to who you are than even your race, ethnicity, or culture. Something that's fundamental about you and I that was broken in what the Bible calls sin, but is mendable through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And as a result of that sacrifice, we're ushered into this justifiable expectation of a permanent place, people, and development of a culture that we never have to worry about being snatched away from. But aside from that, following Jesus' command, to love your neighbor and establish the kingdom here on earth, we have biblical justification for, rolling up our sleeves, getting our hands dirty, and making a difference right here, right now. Now, I think what's interesting, and maybe this will come up in our discussion, but for the Christian, it's a little bit different because neither color nor culture are the starting point to obtain truth, identity, or freedom. It's a different perspective. Now, I notice among the conscious community, color and culture tend to be used as a measuring stick of truth, and something about that seems kind of odd to me. Maybe y'all can explain it, but I suspect that many of us out here claim we're seeking truth, and maybe we are to some extent, but really, if we're honest, truth is in some senses for some of us secondary, and what we're really seeking is validation. From the Christian perspective, we find validation in God and who he made us to be, first and foremost. Now, recapping, didn't get a chance to get to my fourth point, which is cool, but just to kind of, sum it all up. Number one, as far as my major points, people of African descent can find legitimate connecting points with Christianity through African church history. Number two, finding connecting points to Christianity through our ancestors who endured slavery and found Christ to be a vital resource to their survival of and resistance against slavery. Number three, understanding the fallacious and self-defeating ways in which people raise the white man's religion objection. And number four, just pointing to the evidence and merits of the Christian worldview. And the one that I didn't get to was just basically how slavery in the Bible does not present a logical problem in terms of having to abandon the faith. So, I think it's pretty evident that this allegation of Christianity being the white man's religion, while it may be cliche and emotionally pull on our heartstrings, this allegation of Christianity being the white man's religion is just overly simplistic and doesn't account for the types of historical evidence and critical thinking that I've shed light on this evening, which brings me back to my central point. Africans and people of African descent have rational grounds for affirming Christianity without having a sense that doing so is at odds with their ethnic identity. In the words of my man, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I apologize. Marcus Garvey. In the words of my man, Marcus Garvey, I'm leave you with this quote right here. This is Marcus Garvey speaking. Quote, "I believe in God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. I endorse the Nicene Creed. I believe that Jesus died for me. I believe that God lives for me as he does for all men. And no condition you can impose upon me by deceiving me about Christianity will cause me to doubt Jesus Christ and to doubt God. I shall never hold Christ responsible for the commercialization of Christianity by the heartless men who adopt it as the easiest means of fooling and robbing other people out of their land and country." End quote. That's my man, Marcus Garvey, y'all. I'm going to stick with him.
Okay. I see what you did there. King.
Word.
All right, you know what? It's been an absolute pleasure to actually have you on and going in with the
Appreciate it.
information. We're definitely going to open up the panel section of the show in
Word.
a minute. I'm gonna ask everybody to keep their mics muted. Keep your mics muted because on Talk with the Titans we have 3 particular rules. Rule number 1 is to keep your mics muted at all times. Rule number 2 is to respect our Titan cipher. Once they're speaking, please do not interrupt. This show is dedicated to them and them alone. And of course, our audience members. And rule number 3 is please no profanity, no ad hominem attacks. Let's keep it purely academic. We want to encourage our younger generations to actually partake with other family members watching their shows. So, a family or community can actually sit down, view our shows, and actually appreciate the information that we're giving forth. And again, I wanted to actually give a big shout out to my brothers at Black Eyes TV. Is Black Eyes TV in here? I want to know. Black Eyes TV, are you in here? Salute to you, King Richie. I see you, King. If you don't even subscribe to Black Eyes TV, you don't need to go there and subscribe. So please, I'm not even going to talk no more. Let me actually get everybody involved before the time runs out on us. So first and foremost, I wanted to introduce Colin F into the mix. Then I'm going to get King. Then I'm going to get James, and then I'm going to get my brother Red inside as well to actually give a comment or ask a question. So it's only one comment or question, please, and we're going to pass it on to our brother afterwards. So Colin, please unmute your mic. Okay. If not, yep,
Hello.
you there, King?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you got a comment or question, please fire away. Just one comment or question.
Where should I start? Basically, I just don't feel like you answered the question properly about whether or not Christianity is the white man's religion. I feel like you just went back into some historical events or historical figures showing that Black people have been involved in Christianity for a long time. But when you're talking about whether or not Christianity is the white man's religion, we're talking about the introduction of Christianity to Black people. Is it something that is it African? Is it anti-African? Is it for us? Is it against us? That's what we're talking about when we say it's the white man's religion. Was it constructed by Black people or was it constructed by white people? I don't think like you addressed that properly.
Okay, King, go ahead.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is I don't know if you caught the first part of my talk, but when people say that use the term white man's religion, there's a range of meanings there. So I actually specified the central point that I was trying to make right there beginning, and then I repeated it at the end. Now, in terms of the way that you're framing it, is it if I understood you correctly, is it African or is it I don't know. Well, I guess, is it African? Well, I'd be perfectly honest with you. I'm just going to give you my perspective. I think that's the wrong question. The better question is it true? Like nobody asked, like in terms of physics, is it African? Or in terms of mathematics, is it African? You know what I'm saying? The question is, does it align with reality? And so this gets back to, what I was saying before, is that I find in the conscious community, people will use culture as a measuring stick for truth. And I think that's just a wrong foot to get off on. Now, let me explain to you why. Let's say that, you had a full description of everything that your ancestors believed. I'm saying your indigenous ancestors. Let's say you tracked it all the way back and you understood it, everything that they believed. That wouldn't answer the question of whether or not what they believed was true. It would just answer the question of, what did they believe? Now, the more fundamental question is, what is true? You see what I'm saying? And so personally, I think when people say, is Christianity a white man's religion? And they frame it in the way that you did, I think that they're getting off on the wrong foot. And I don't want to throw a big word in there. I'm not trying to sound like a know-it-all, but the word would be, the epistemology that undergirds your question, I think is faulty. The question is, what is true? And by true, I mean, what aligns with reality? Christians, I think what happens is, maybe this is somewhat of a side question, but I think people start with a presupposition of relativism. You know what I'm saying? Like, what's good for you, what's good for me, and I think that's just, the wrong way to look at it. The question is there a such thing as ultimate truth? And if there is, then what is it? That's the more foundational question. Secondly, when you say, is it African? Well, I think the question is, what do you mean by African? because according to the latest theories, the out of Africa theory, I mean, everybody's African. It depends on how you want to, like, where do you set the bar at who is African or who isn't, or what culture is African or what isn't. And I know these are terms that get thrown around all the time, but I think you had to be more specific in what you mean by that. But ultimately, my point is culture is not a measuring stick for truth. If anything, it might guide you towards what your ancestors believed, and you can have a better idea of that. But then you still have to ask the question is, what is true? And when I'm presenting Christianity, what I'm saying is, I'm not just presenting a set of ideas, that are just housed in the Bible. What I'm saying is that in real time, Jesus rose from the grave. In real time, these things happen. It aligns with reality. So that's kind of how I respond there.
Okay, my brother. You know what? Inquiring minds definitely do want to know. What was the ethnicity of Jesus Christ and his disciples?
Well, man, they were Hebrew. We say ethnicity, right? Now here's what I want to say is that what happens is when we say ethnicity, we still attach the idea of race to that. You know what I'm saying? Like, for whatever, because it's just the way that we've come up. We've come up in this modern Western world. But when we're talking about ethnicity, they were Hebrews. Full stop. That was their ethnicity. Now, if we want to say what color were they, now that's a whole different question. I think that you had, Hebrews. Well, this is my perspective. Some theologians may disagree. I'm not a theologian, but some theologians may disagree. But you had all spectrums of Hebrews, from jet black to not blonde hair, blue eyed, but certainly maybe like an olive color Mediterranean. And we can just look at the lineages and see that. I mean, daggone it, Moses was married to Ethiopian. You know what I'm saying? So whatever their child would have had to been dark to some extent. And then furthermore, we look at the Hebrews. They're not. How can I say this without going on too long? But if you look at the Hebrews of the Bible, they weren't racial exclusivists. You know what I'm saying? You can convert, you can be any color and convert to being a Hebrew. You know what I'm saying? If you got circumcised and submitted to the laws. So over thousands or however long their history was, you had an amalgamation of people. So I would say if you look at the Mediterranean, in the first century, the full range of colors that you see, spectrum of colors that you see in that region, you would expect to see Hebrews of all those different colors and hues, so maybe that helps a little bit.
Excellent.
But we got to distinguish between color and ethnicity, I think.
Definitely. So, in saying that, and I know you're very great at your history as well. Also, could you just give our audience members, your website again, where we can find all your sources, all your citations from, please?
Yes, sir. So I posted my bibliography at my website, which is www.trueidpodcast.com. So that's trueidpodcast.com. You can also hit me up on Facebook, Adam Coleman, and it'd be in parentheses, aka Scott Lane. On Twitter, Scott Lane 7. If you ever have a question or want to hurl insults at me, whatever you want to do, what I'm saying, just hit me up in any one of those. Also, I write articles regularly for kingmovement.com. So you can also find me there, kingmovement.com. Shout out to my man, Chris Broussard, and freethinkingministries.com. That's freethinkingministries.com. Shout out to the big homie, Tim Stratton, as well. So, if you want to, catch up with me, you can definitely get me on there.
Excellent. And True ID, is it TRU? Rather than TRUE.
Yeah, man. I'm a hip hop head, man. So we got to do some kind of alternative spelling, with like everything. So it's TRUID podcast.com. And actually, what I did with the bibliography, I sectioned it off. So based on the topic, you can see, like, I think I have an ancient African history section. I think I did like an American section, and then other. So you can see, in those different sections, I sectioned off which sources I use where and for what. So try to help people out. All right.
Thank you. Brother James, are you there? Okay. I'm going to go to Hakeem. Hakeem King, are you there? Hakeem or King, like, I don't know if you can hear me. Are you at work? I don't know. Okay, I'm going to go to somebody else. If you're available to speak right now, please unmute your mic.
So what to do?
Okay, you read. Did you have any comment or questions for the brother?
I want to comment. I want to ask the brother what comment/question. I want to ask the brother, did he ever read the book Shaping the Black America by Dr. Lerone Bennett.
Am I
Did
back?
you hear me?
No, actually, I didn't. I heard you say, "Have I ever read the book?" And then it kind of got fuzzy. I'm not sure which book you were talking about.
The Shaping the Black America by Dr. Lerone Bennett.
No, I haven't read that book.
Okay, I think we've got a question from our comment section. Christian Mbasila asks, Kalam, ask him, doesn't Christianity originate from Rome, and having Pope Constantine ordering its inception to make the one and only religion of the emperor make a European religion? Thanks.
Well, no, the short answer is no. You see, this is interesting. So, first of all, we have to get a better understanding of what Christianity is. Okay, when we use that term Christianity, just from a purely biblical standpoint, Christianity didn't just like pop up out of a vacuum. Okay, Christianity is a progression from the Judaic religion, which is a progression from the worship of the Most High that predates that. You know what I'm saying? So really, when we talk about Christianity, we're just talking about an era of worship of the Most High and what God is doing in this particular era, how he chose to reveal himself. So when we say Christianity started in Rome, well, I mean, it's kind of a tricky saying because, at that point, Egypt was part of Rome, Jerusalem had been taken over by Rome, so it's just kind of a sloppy way of looking at it, I think. So it started in Roman occupied Jerusalem. That would be a good way to put it. If you're referring to Constantine, I think at the last part of that comment, the answer would be no. I mean, it certainly didn't start with Constantine at the Council of Nicaea, because you have, again, everybody that I named, Athanasius, no, I'm sorry, not Augustine, but Tertullian, Athanasius, Cyprian, Anthony, those guys were all Christians, before the Council of Nicaea. So obviously it couldn't start at the Council of Nicaea. I'm not trying to, call any names. Actually, maybe I'll just leave the name out. But when people say stuff like, Jesus was created at the Council of Nicaea, I mean, just everything is about the Council of Nicaea. And I think what needs to happen is, just respectfully, I would say to the conscious community, you guys really need to do your homework on the Council of Nicaea. I mean, obviously, so for example, how could Jesus be created at the Council of Nicaea when the whole reason the Council of Nicaea came about was due to a scriptural debate about Jesus? You know what I'm saying? It's just silly, So short answer, no, Christianity did not begin at the Council of Nicaea. Christianity began in Roman occupied Jerusalem. I guess that'd be a way to put it.
Excellent. Thank you. My brother Hakeem, if you're available to unmute your mic, please unmute your mic and pose your question or comment. Also, we have over 145, 150 people, actually 146 people tuned in at the moment. I want to ask you guys, man, if you're enjoying Titans TV, please hit the like button. Hit the like button. Hit the like button. Let us know that you're actually supporting us out here. You love the diversity of the content that you're actually receiving over here on Talk with the Titans and Titans TV. I know I've been slacking on the Speaker's Corner videos. I've got a ton of videos that I need to edit and need to upload. I've got some real shockers that I got for you guys. I know I need to put them up. Unfortunately, time is really, not really strong on for me right about now. So yeah, let me see, my brother. Can you unmute your mic? If not, I'm gonna go straight to my brother Colin. Colin, have you got another question? And I'm going to just quickly pose this question. My brother Ali Dawood L writes here, Kalam, doesn't Rome occupy Jerusalem mean that it's a white religion? Kalam, how do I donate to you? Okay. There is another way or means of actually donating to me. Well, there's a few means of donating to me. I don't know if you can see my screen right now. You can literally hit the super chat button right here. And you can send a super chat. Okay, my brother is at work. So you can send a super chat right here and just type in the amount of money that you would like to send in, 20, 10, whatever you would like to send in. It actually helps to keep the channel growing and afloat itself. Let me see. And then there's another way where you can do it. It is, where's my Patreon? Right there. Right down here. You literally just click onto the Patreon account and it should take you to this screen, which should say Kalam L is creating videos worth watching. So yeah, right here, we've got, 3 Patreons. Kalam is creating videos worth watching. You could become a Patreon, become a member where you're donating a certain amount of money every single month. If we did this, I'm pretty sure we can get most of our Speakers Corner content actually done for you guys. But unfortunately, because we don't have the time and capacity, I can't always, give up my freedom, so to speak, to actually do certain videos. So, but if you do donate, it goes a very, very long way. I'd like to shout out everybody who's actually donated. I'm actually going to make a list of people hopefully soon. We've got Zion Lex actually coming in tomorrow. So I'm going to make a list of everybody who's actually donated to Titans TV in the last month or two. And I'm going to big you guys up tomorrow. I'm going to be showing you my my actual love and respect for you. Let me just make sure. Do we have anybody else that would like to ask some questions? Because I'm tired, family. I'm tired. I'm not going to lie to you, man. We had African Liberation Day, African Liberation Day up in Birmingham yesterday. We had Robin Walker. We had Anthony Browder. We had some great lectures going on, man. Some great interviews taking place. Black Eyes TV, again, I got to give you my shout outs. The marketplace was just popping, man. The marketplace was popping. It was me and my brother Sarah that was up there. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. So my brother, you got a question. Hakeem, I know you're at work, man, but go ahead, man. Ask your question.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it nice, short and sweet. So I was following, I didn't really catch his premise or basis of what he was trying to say as far as Christianity and his relevance towards us African Americans and the Africans and across the whole diaspora. It was just a little bit confusing for me, especially knowing that our West African ancestors were not Christians. They did not come across those boats and those ships as Christians worshiping Jesus. So my whole thing was just what was his whole basis? What was he standing on? What was he trying to get across? That's my question.
All right, thank you, King.
Yeah, good question, man. So I would refer back to I think it was the third point that I made in regard to the genetic fallacy. Okay, first of all, how someone comes to believe something is independent of whether or not something is true. You know what I'm saying? So I think what happens in the conscious community, and actually let me take that back. It's not just the conscious community, but we tend to take we equate what is indigenous with with what is true. You know what I'm saying? Just because something is indigenous doesn't mean that it's true or false. It just means that that is what people believe in this particular area. I think the more fundamental question is what is true. Now, again, we can maybe get into this another show, but I would encourage people to study just what's called epistemology, and how to come to rational conclusions about what we know. And I would say that the concept of what is indigenous or not is not the correct measuring stick to determine what is true or not. The question is what you want to do. And actually, Kalam, you brought this up a couple of weeks ago when I was on the live chat. What you want to do is take a look at what people are claiming and then decide based on the logic or evidence or lack thereof, whether or not it's true. And regardless of where it originates from, if something is true, then that's something that any rational person would align themselves with. So I keep coming. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I do kind of want to get this idea out there that and I understand, that based upon, the fact that we were ripped from, West Africa and all that kind of stuff, that wound is deep. But I just kind of want to throw the idea out there that the concept of what is or isn't indigenous is not a correct measuring stick for what is or is not true. You want to apply logic and evidence, to determine what is or isn't true. Now, let me just give you an example. So, for example, people saying things like Egyptians believed ... You know what I'm saying? Okay, we're gonna wrap it up. So perfect example, like, did the Memphis Egyptians believe the same thing as the ones in Heliopolis? No, not on every point. But I could say, well, the indigenous Egyptians believe such and such. Well, that doesn't answer the question of what is true. Or, in Egypt, in mathematics, they didn't have a concept of zero. That got developed in other cultures. Does that mean that the concept of zero is not a valuable mathematical concept? No. Even if it's just because something is indigenous or not doesn't determine whether or not it is true.
Can other people, hey, Kalam, can other people build on the question?
They call them dipped out.
I guess so. That's what it seemed like. Well, I mean, the whole notion that black folks wasn't over here, Chris. That's why I brought up that book, Shaping a Black America, by Dr. Laurent Bennett. In that book, he shows the evidence of uh, uh, rules and laws by the British colonies that said that uh, basically, I'm just gonna sum it up, that they had a rule in the British colonies that stated that if one of the slaves was already a Christian, that they had to set them free. And they found out that 1/3 of the Christians that were already brought over here were already Christians.
Mhm.
Not, you know what I'm saying? So that matter of fact that they had ended up changing the rule as a result of that particular rule. Now, anybody that would go on to say that they were not Christians already in West Africa must not truly understand what Islam was. Because if you truly understand the history of Islam and the origin of Islam, you would not make that statement. Then you would have to qualify that with the understanding of the Jews in Morocco, Jews in Algeria, Jews in Libya. So to say that a person was not actually following the scriptures on no level, you truly don't understand what Islam was, and you truly don't understand about Morocco having 250,000 to 300,000 Jews in Morocco alone. So that's considered, you know what I'm saying, Greater West Africa. So I mean, the notion, and then when you go look at who were the people, what was the whole slave trade and the whole issue that Europe had with the people of that time, that whole issue was a continuation of the war with the Moors. So and Moors were not exclusively Islamic. So
Okay, peace, 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 King. Sorry about that. My mic has stopped working. But what I would like to quickly say to you guys is this. We've literally reached the end of the show right now. So what I want to ask you guys to do is please, please, please share the link. We're definitely going to have our brother on again very shortly. I'm sure it's in the next coming weeks. We're definitely going to have him on to continue with these presentations, maybe go into some slavery in the Bible, or maybe bring up some new topics. So I want you guys, I want you guys to grill my brother. I don't want you to just let him get off so lightly. I actually want you to grill him real good. Drop your comments down in the comment section. We definitely want to get it in. We definitely want to see what everybody else actually has to say about, what our brother was presenting. Do you agree with him? Do you not agree with him? Do you think that his presentation was excellent? Would you like to hear more from our brother? Tell me, let me know, because to me, I know you're not gonna say, Cal, you're cooning, but for me, I enjoyed, I learned a lot. I can't wait actually to go through his bibliography. He mentioned some great, his great theologians, great scholars of the past that I always quote from, people like Clement. There's a lot of wealth of information from somebody like him about ancient Egypt, even modern day, or what was going on during Egyptian times with the traditional Egyptians themselves. So that's a great wealth of information. What's going on with the Jews themselves as well, with inside of Alexandria. There's a lot of customs that you'll be actually amazed by as well. So, please, guys, don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. Actually pay attention to the presentation, and please, please, please hit the share button, man. Like this. I'm going to leave my brother with the last words as we close out.
Hey man, I just want to say thanks again. For having me on. And before I get out of here, I definitely want to say big ups to my pops. Unfortunately, I lost him on January 6th. He's definitely resting in power right now, so definitely want to give big ups to my natural dad. Aside from that, though, man, I know when people see Christian, the red flag goes up and they're ready to go in, like we're the enemy or whatever. But honestly, man, I'm just here to share information. To learn from folks and to really just politic on different things and hopefully grow as others are growing. And, I just appreciate you having me on, brother. And definitely want to give a shout out to my man, A.O. Green, the BEC Media. Check them out. Check out my man, got my man Vocab Malone out there. Again, shout out to Chris Broussard, King Movement, and my man Tim Stratton, big homie Tony Aries, and just everybody else that I probably missed. But, I got a lot of people out there. So just shout out to everybody, man.